Week 5 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few running backs I would start this week. The first guy, Saquan Barkley of the New York Giants. So right here, if you had any doubt about Saquon Barkley, the last 2 weeks now, he's had big fantasy days. Week 3 versus Atlanta, 16 carries, 51 yards, and a touchdown. And he added 6 catches for 43 yards. And Week 4 versus the Saints, he had a big ball game, 13 carries, 52 yards, and a touchdown. And 5 catches for 74 yards and a game-winning touchdown there. So Barkley this week's got a good matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys, where he usually has big ball games versus Dallas is Barkley. And in this one, I think he'll go for 100 to 120 total yards and find the end zone at least once and maybe twice, because the Giants here, they know they got to score a lot of points to keep up with this Dallas Cowboy offense here, and I think they could do it. So Saquon Barkley, I think he's ready to go now. The workload's increased each week here for him, and he's starting to put up big numbers for fantasy owners. The next running back's Darrell Henderson of the Los Angeles Rams. So Henderson, he came back in Week 4 after missing Week 3's ball game with a rib injury, and he's been very solid so far this season with 15 or more fantasy points in PPR leagues so far this year. Is Henderson. Week 4 in his return, 14 carries, 89 yards, and he caught 5 balls for 27 yards. So that's a part of his game he's trying to improve this season here. Is Henderson is catching the football and getting yards after catch. And right here, Week 5, it's a plus matchup at the Seattle Seahawks that give up the second most fantasy points to running backs this season. So right here, it's going to be a big ball game. It's going to be high scoring in my opinion. And we're going to see both these teams go up and down the field. I don't think it's going to be a blowout like the Rams and the Arizona Cardinals we saw in Week 4. But I think right here, Henderson, he could go 15, 20 fantasy points in this one. And he's definitely a running back I would start this week. The next running back I would start is Leonard Fournette of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So it looks like it's Leonard Fournette's backfield now over there in Tampa. Going off what happened in Week 4, he had a full workload, 20 carries, 91 yards, 3 catches for 47 yards in that ball game for Leonard Fournette. And right here, Ronald Jones, he barely got any carries. Giovanni Bernard, he missed that ball game in Week 4 at the New England Patriots. And right here in Week 5 versus the Miami Dolphins, who give up the third most fantasy points, I could see them running away early in this ball game, Tampa Bay, and trying to run the clock out by mid-third quarter, early fourth. So I think Leonard Fournette, he's a decent catch passer out of the backfield. He's going to get a lot of goal line carries, in my opinion. And right now, he's the number one man over there in Tampa Bay, and I would give him a start. The next running back I would look to start week's Chase Edmonds of the Arizona Cardinals. So Chase Edmonds, so far, he's been great for fantasy football the first month of the season, with double-digit fantasy points every week so far. And last week, he had a big ball game versus the Rams. 12 carries, 120 yards rushing, and 4 catches for 19 yards. The only thing that I didn't like in that ball game, obviously, James Conner, the bigger and more physical running back, had 2 goal line touchdowns in that game. So if you add a touchdown to that game last week for Chase Edmonds, he cracks 25 fantasy points. So right here, he versus a 49er team that right now they're a little banged up with injuries, and it looks like Trey Lance is going to start. But right here, this Cardinal team, they're smoking teams in the early going this season, except in Week 2 with a tough victory, 34-33. But right here, the San Francisco 49ers give up the 9th most fantasy points to running backs. And right here, another NFC West matchup. And I think Chase Edmonds has a good ball game. And the 5th and final running back I would start this week's Cordell Patterson of the Atlanta Falcons. So Cordell Patterson, what a surprise and what a player he's been so far. And he qualifies at wide receiver and running back in fantasy leagues, but I'm going to count them as a running back. So right here, they signed Mike Davis in the offseason, was the Falcons, to a deal, and everyone assumed he was going to be the lead back, especially with Todd Gurley not coming back. But right here, since Week 2, Cordell Patterson's been having great games. Week 2 with Tampa, 7 carries, 11 rushing yards, and a touchdown. 5 catches, 58 yards, and a TD added on. Week 3 at the Giants, 7 carries, 20 yards, and added 6 catches for 82 yards. And last week versus the Washington football team, he went off 6 carries, 34 yards, and added 5 catches for 82 yards and 3 touchdowns. So Matt Ryan trusts him. He's Matt Ryan's number one option right now with Julio Jones out of town in Tennessee. And right here in Week 5, they versus the New York Jets, who give up the most fantasy points to running back. So this will be an early game in London. And I think Cordell Patterson, he's not going to get 3 touchdowns, but I think he'll get 100 total yards and find the end zone in this game. So that's a few running backs I would start here in week 5 of the fantasy football season.